A very, very good morning to all of my listeners and all of my subscribers, all of my students and friends. After a long time, here I come with another semi-academic video. Currently, I am quite interested in travel studies, which has a subgenre of the study of place and space. And today we are going to see a very, very interesting aspect of how far can the conceptualization as well as negotiation by human beings towards place can go. How far can the place be sublimated into or conceptualized as or negotiated as a space which is mysterious, which is promising, and which is challenging and assuring at the same time. Today we will talk about a place called Sikkim, but not in terms of its travel potential, but in terms of its belonging to a concept of place, which considers place as a plane where material and physical forces on one hand and energetics of the spiritual world, they meet, they have an interface, they crisscross, something like what in figure of speech we call a chiasmus or a crossing over. And the resultant is that the place is, by vector resolution of all these processes, raised to and is conceptualized and believed to be in human mind as a space which is nothing less than a promised land, nothing less than the ultimate refuge, nothing less than a symptomatic replication of paradise. Today we are going to talk about the notion of Beyul in a particular branch of Buddhism and how this concept of Beyul fits to the history of as well as some modern day aspects of Sikkim. First and foremost, this term Beyul, it has several connotations. It can literally mean a hidden valley. It can literally mean a sacred hidden valley. Now, hiddenness gives secretness, which is very close to sacredness. Because we know often the sacred just cannot jostle its way through the throngs of the profane. It has to isolate and hide and conceal itself till the right time arrives. That is why sacred is often secret, and secret is often sacred. Beyul is a sacred and secret valley land. It's a place which is the ultimate refuge, so when the world will be too much full of turmoil and strife, believers, goodwillers, spiritually motivated person who want to do good, be good, and live good, and also have a good ambience for doing all this good, can seek shelter by accessing this secret, hidden, sacred refuge called Beyul. Secondly, it is a synecdoche or part for whole of nothing less than paradise. While paradise has its celestial inaccessibility to living human beings, with singular determination, motivation, and purity, even when alive, a living human being can access the replication of that celestial paradise on earth, in the earthly plane, where the celestiality of the paradise and the earthly sublime of nature or landscape, they crisscross each other in a hidden valley or in a hidden land. Thirdly, Beyul talks about a kind of genealogy of place as space, in which Padmasambhava understood that the world will not always be very, very conducive for practitioners of good faith. So, the treasures of good practices let's keep it this simple, have to be hidden in, concealed in certain hiding chambers. And these hiding chambers can be topographical, for example, a stone or a mountain, or these can be also hydrographic, for example, beneath a river or behind a fountain or a cascade. Or these can be also cognitive, which means in the mind of, or the memory or mnemonics of the disciples, so that when the right time arrives, whatever be the time and space coordinate, in that birth or incarnation of that disciple, the mnemonics will be activated, that the repressed hidden memory will be activated, it will come out, and the need and urge and willingness and determination to rediscover what had been once discovered and hidden will be ignited. So Beyul is not only a space that is hidden, it has to be unlocked again and again and again in a recurrence of rediscoveries, in a retreat of retreating moments. So it's a kind of mnemonic reinvocation, and therefore the Beyul is not exactly a topos or place, but a chronotopos or time place, which comes back at the right times through the agency of the right people, right participants. Then comes the matter of the important binary in a particular tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, and that is that of a rediscovered and that of the sacred scroll. So there will be need of someone to unlock, and there will be something to be unlocked. It's exactly in the stroke of slash that divides the binary between Totan and Dharma that the efficacy as well as credibility of Beyul lies as a signifier. Matter and spiritual worlds, they would overlap in a Beyul. They will have a chiasmus, and that will mean multiple perception dimensions. So while ordinary people in ordinary place would see time and place as in a certain way of dimensional perception, in a Beyul, these things will be palimpsestic, layered upon layered, and also kaleidoscopic. They will not have a linear continuum of time and place, and they will not have a fixity and particularity of one thing occupying one coordinate in the time-space coordinates. Rather, we will have multiple perception dimensions, and therefore, for the tantric practitioners, we will very that would mean to understand Sikkim as a Beyul, or a space which can be called Beyul. We have to take into consideration one religious or spiritual or metaphysical aspect, and one aspect of terrain, environment, landscape, topography. In other words, a spiritual and a physical material dimension. The point is that there is a long-lasting tradition that names the Beyul as Beyul, believes in the Beyul, and hopes in the Beyul. And this tradition has to be traced when we are analyzing something related to Beyul, right to the notion of dharma or dhamma in Buddhism. In Buddhist philosophy, the phenomenological bracket of essence is called dhamma or dharma. It's like that the different substances, objects, things in this material or physical world, they all have some essences. So the named objects are noumena, they have a phenomenon which is bracketed within them, which can emanate through them or which can hide through them, which is carried through them or communicated through them, or it can be invoked through them, or also can be resisted and repressed within them. Dhamma or dharma is therefore something like a cosmological essence, which when we are using it religiously becomes a cosmological merit, which is law-bound, which is orderly, which is, of course, governed by a systematic providence or plan, and deviation from which would be bad life, bad ethics, following which would be a kind of ethical negotiation of this earthly world with the spiritual essence kept intact within it. Now the custodians of dharma are called dharmapala or dharmopal. This notion of custodian is very important for the Buddhist philosophy, because the custodian is a defender of the necessary condition of a space, so that the entrants of the inhabitants of a space, the participants of the physico-temporal spatial happening of a space and its unfolding, they can continue to preserve and perform that merit or essence which was phenomenologically bracketed within the space as a dhamma, and within these lives as dhamma or dharma. So dharmapal is basically like some energy, force, deity or agent who would help in the palan or retentive performance of dhamma or dharma. Now, dharmapala can be conceptualized on two scales. One, on the scale of spiritual wisdom, so that would be Gyan-pala, Yana-pala, who will be custodians of the wisdom, custodians of the enlightenment. And there will be, taxonomically conceivable, a Lokpala or Lokpal, who will be custodian of the worldly negotiation. Because you know that in a Beyul, or in a kind of space which offers itself as a sacred as well as secret place where the material earthly dimensions have an interface with the spiritual forces, the earthly dimension is not to be also lagging far behind in the consideration, because then the essence loses its balance, and the worldly custodian, the earthly custodian of earthly things, earthly negotiations, is called Lokpal or Lokpala. Now, Beyul is nothing but a space preserved, presided over, defended and maintained by a dharmapala or dharmapal, so that the cosmological merit and essence of the place, the phenomenologically bracketed eidos of the place, is retained until and unless the right time comes when these retentive mnemonics, where there is this retained memory, can be activated for good cause, for example, refuge, or for example also as enlightenment. Now these dharmapalas are conceptualized in Tibet and Buddhism mainly as very, very wrathful forces. The question may arise, just like Blake's tiger is so wrathful, why are these retentive custodians so wrathful? There are two answers to it. First, that these may be pre-Buddhist forces, deities, shrines, sites, energies, which have been harnessed by the Buddhist gurus into Buddhist followers, custodians, taking an oath of preserving, taking an oath of performing what they have been made responsible of. And for that obedience to Buddhism, a wrathful mien to the antagonists are to be performed. Secondly, this wrathfulness helps in the sustenance of the energy of willingness or intention to participate in this task. Now, these dharmapalas are very, very symptomatic, because as I said, in the first cause of dharmapalas being wrathful, we have already seen that pre-Buddhist forces or deities were assimilated into the legion of dharmapalas. So naturally, what would it amount to? It would amount to a certain amount of animism already always invested in the figure of the dharmapala. So the dharmapala may be a marked feature of the topography, for example, a stone or a peak or summit. It can be a very, very old, high and kind of always full of foliages tree. So the first definition of Beyul as a sacred and secret land, especially valley by geography, would now mean that Dharmapala is presiding over Beyul, for retention of Beyul as the space which is sacred and secret. So it is a space where even matter embodies Dharmapala. And this Dharmapala would be associated symbolically with the noospheric, which means from the animal and plant kingdom, marks, objects and features, as well as topographical marks, objects and features. Now, what is the role of the human being or the Anthropocene in this ecosystem? There are two things which are very important in this Buddhist negotiation, and that is pilgrimage and number two, offering. These are methods to keep the harmony of these topographical and noospheric environmental features that mark the Dharmapala presiding over the Beyul, and the anthropological intervention, which is like what living people would share with this ecosystem. So it is, at the end of the day, a very, very sustainable approach to land stewardship also. The point is, what are the hallmarks of a Beyul? First and foremost, the terrain must be difficult so that the unfit cannot access it. Number two, it has to be topographically sublime, for example, very high mountains. Thirdly, there must be a resourcefulness or bounty in the material abundance of that space. For example, the 5 peaks of Ganzenzonga, popularly known as Kanchenjunga, they hide, number 1, salt, number 2, gold and turquoise, number 3, dharma scriptures and arms, and finally the medicinal seeds. Now, these are very, very important natural as well as traditional resources, which need to be hidden from the enemy or from the misinterpreter or from the wrong hands. So the material abundance is always lurking there as a signified of the signifier called Beyul. Then there is this question of spiritual harmony, a kind of pantheistic investment would be there, and a kind of iconographic investment would be there. So that the mountain, which is very, very high, will be iconographically reminding us of a very, very strong custodian or sentry. On the contrary, the river that is running very, very pure would remind us of the flow of life. So the elements of our earthly life, elements of our spiritual life, and the elements of the natural life of the things and objects that we find in the landscape, they will already have a symbolic harmony. Then the Beyul must be a space which, if exposed to today's critical interpretations, no problem that they are Eurocentric, but they are true, and you have passed your examinations through using them. So the critical theories of the West, which we have all more or less have assimilated into ourselves, would remind us that the Beyul would be a space in which there will be at least a hypothetical replication of the ideal political organization that had been lost after the invasion of enemy or after colonization, that can be still found at a mimetic miniature. For example, lots of Beyuls boast of replicating the abode or the residence of Padmasambhava himself. Lots of Beyuls boast of an exact point-to-point similarity with the topography of the paradise. So now, if we sum up again, there will be difficult terrain, there will be topographical sublimation, there will be material resourcefulness and abundance, there will be spiritual harmony between man, matter, and spirit, and there will be replication of the ideal political organization and the ideal paradise in features that are encompassed within the already bracketed phenomenon or dhamma of the Beyul. Now, if we turn our heads towards international politics, the Beyul must be a hidden place, and a hidden place is a place of safety, a safety that gives us the guarantee of living and continuation of life, insulated and immune from the invasion of the antagonist. Tibet, for example, is a high-altitude desert and nothing else. With very little vegetation, life in Tibet is no fun. Those who have actually gone to Tibet and actually had encountered, at least temporarily, the life in high-altitude Tibet, they will understand that it is no fun. It is a struggle. It is a struggle full of conflicts. And without much natural boundaries and man-made fortification, Tibet was always even more vulnerable to man-made antagonism. As such, it was already exposed to nature-made antagonism. You have to also understand that in the anthropological hierarchy, the Nyingmapas, from whose tradition this whole notion of Beyul comes, they never enjoyed political power as much as the Sakyas or the Gelugs. The Nyingmapas were basically assimilist, like they used to incorporate what were picked up in a negative capability, and they were not conversionists with words-worthy and egotistical sublime. So, in their idealization of a place as a space, Beyul must be a topographical aspiration. Just think about the geography. All the Beyuls are basically on the southern side of Himalayas, which means it is climatologically better than the northern side. There are more medicinal plants growing, which would be metonymy towards eternal life. There is good rainfall, and therefore natural resources and crops are good. and there is better soil as in comparison with the northern side. Now, if we are turning our focus towards Sikkim, in 8th century, Guru Rinpoche or Padmasambhava is claimed to have exorcised the space of all the negative occults. He is supposed to have consecrated it, which means that Sikkim was post-8th century a post-cathartic purity. And the Sikkimese people, or those who would have or have been granted access to the land, they would be both enlightened or paus, P-A-W-O-S, and pure, P-A-M-O-S, pamos. Purity inside, enlightenment from outside. That is the spark of the chosen citizen in any myth of the world which speaks of a promised land. In 8th century, Padmasambhava is also supposed to have thought that because Buddhism is not an aggressive religion as such, so its hegemony and cultural imperialism will depend much on what it can hide from the enemy, till those who are willing can rediscover it and use it. So there goes the story of the hiddenness of the textual treasure, and there goes the story of the chosen mnemonizer who would remember it and will have determination, courage, and singularity of purpose to unlock that which had been hidden. So here is the birth of the chronotype in the anecdotes of Padmasambhava, which dates back to 8th century. Now in 14th century, there was this Rigzin Godemechen, who was one of the first pioneers to have attempted at least partial unlocking of Sikkim as a Beyul. He established the Pao Hamri Monastery, which is very close to my home, close in the sense that it is closer than other people who are taking interest in it. It's near the Yuksum Valley, and this was the epicenter around which the first cartographical pioneering of the Beyul was unlocked in 14th century. In 16th century, Latsun Namka Zigbi, who was also known later as Latsun Chenpo, he redefined a number of Lepcha sacred sites into Buddhist assimilated monuments of a Beyul. So he was incorporating into the Beyul that which had been palimpsestically layered over from the earlier pre-Buddhist animism. It is also believed that Godemechen had a trial by none other than the custodian Dharmapal of this Sikkim as a Beyul, named Kanchenjunga or Ganzenzonga, after which, after successfully passing the trial, Ganzenzonga appeared to Namka Zigmi or Chenpo as a white swan, and this was the conducive moment as well as atmosphere for writing a ritual text which celebrates literally Sikkim as a Beyul, named Nesol, N-E-S-O-L. And then comes the story of the modern times, Tolsok Lingpa, the well-known story of 1962's, following the turmoil and political invasion of the 1950s. In 1962, Tolsok Lingpa comes to Sikkim with a determination to open a Beyul called Demoshong, whose custodian Dharmapal is Ganzenzonga, which is a valley of abundance of fecund nature full of rice and fruits, which runs parallelly by cartography to western Sikkim, and at whose spiritual epicenter there is this Tashi Ring monastery, quite close to my home, closer than what others interested in this subject would find. And these were the events, these were the milestone events that linked Sikkim, an imagined community, to use the term of Benedict Anderson, a heterogene which can only be homogenized with the conception of a promised land, which needs to insulate itself against the onslaught of the outsiders, including researching outsiders who do not have competence, and an assurance to those who had come long ago or were the son of the soils that this place is gonna be all right against all types of political and cultural turmoil. So Sikkim becomes a Beyul. It becomes one of the most sacrosanct, one of the most ancient, but one of the most lately opened, unlocked Beyuls of all times in the tradition that believes in Beyul. At the end of the day, we understand that the prestige of a place, the sanctity of a place, the beauty of a place, the uniqueness of a place, even in the most literal anthropological sense, depends on how the human interventions are going to deal with the place. If it is dealt with respect, with reverence, with hope, with optimism, that investment from the human cognitive domain can raise any place into a sanctuary. And now if there is a tradition of documented efforts to unlock the sanctuary, and if there is a spiritual revelation associated with the event of the unlocking, including the demise of those who were not fully fit, that sanctuary becomes, from the perspective of Tibetan Buddhism, a Beyul. And Sikkim uses Beyul as modern 21st century individuals. We should not be greedy for the bounty. We should not be greedy for an escape. We should not be greedy for self-aggrandizing by exploiting this Beyulness of Sikkim. You have to respect Sikkim, not love fetishistically, but love it with dignity.